Hello and welcome to Press TV News Analysis. I'm Kaveh Taqwi. Late on Sunday night, U.S. time, President Barack Obama, in a televised speech, made the announcement that America's most wanted, one which former U.S. President George Bush Jr. had said, wanted dead or alive, namely Osama bin Laden, had been killed in a firefight in his $1 million compound in Abbottabad in Pakistan, 60 kilometers from the capital, Islamabad.
An amateur video showing fires inside Osama bin Laden's compound near Islamabad after an alleged U.S. raid that led to the Al-Qaeda leader's death. Bin Laden's death came over 10 years after the 9/11 events. The U.S. claims bin Laden was killed on late Sunday, but there is no way to independently verify the claim. And there are serious lingering doubts, as this video footage shows.
Well, one of them is a very key figure in security. He also had dealings with Omar Sheikh, the man who murdered Osama bin Laden. Omar Sheikh, the man who murdered Osama bin Laden.
Regardless of the time of his death, the timing of its announcement by the U.S. president is just perfect for Barack Obama, who is bidding for re-election in 2 years. The U.S. can now also afford to downplay the foreign troops' death toll for April in Afghanistan, the deadliest month in several years. Meanwhile, Washington also says bin Laden's death does not mean an end to the unpopular war in Afghanistan.
We should not forget that the battle to stop Al-Qaeda and its syndicate of terror will not end with the death of bin Laden. In Afghanistan, we will continue taking the fight to Al-Qaeda and their Taliban allies.
Following the 9/11 events, the U.S. and its allies unleashed all-out wars on Afghanistan and Iraq. At the time, the mission objective was said to be capturing the Saudi-born terrorist, dead or alive, and also to dismantle the Al-Qaeda network. Now, what could be next for the U.S. and its allies after bin Laden's death? Many say the U.S. military has no more excuses to remain in the region.
I said frankly, we need a definite declaration from Mr. Obama himself that there is no need to stay in Afghanistan and there is no need to stay in Iraq.
Most agree that with bin Laden's body allegedly buried at sea, the U.S. must now invent a new pretext to prolong its stay in Afghanistan and the Middle East region.
We're going to break this down further. Our guests for this news analysis include Jim Brand, who's a spokesman for Stop the War Coalition, joining us from London. We also have Saeed Ahmad Khamouche, a political analyst, who joins us from Afghanistan's capital, Kabul. And rounding up the guest list, Webster G. Tarpley, who's an author, journalist, and lecturer, who joins us from Washington. I want to thank you all for joining us in this news analysis. Let me first go to Jim Brand. Jim Brand, first the location, Pakistan, not Afghanistan, and not in the tribal area, as assumed by the U.S. intelligence, such as the Tora Bora area, in $1 million house in a town inhabited by 500,000, in which he lived for the past 5 years.
Well, I think before saying anything else, I think it's worth pointing out, as your reporter said earlier, the whole of this process, the whole of the process of the supposed discovery of the house, the capture of the killing of Osama bin Laden, etc., the whole of it is an elementary violation of the norms that would apply to violent death in, for example, Britain or the United States. In other words, the United States, under the war on terror, absolutely refuses to apply the very principles which it says of respect for law and order, etc., which it says it is trying to export to the rest of the world, because the United States authorities will tell us, as they say, exactly what they want to tell us. They will follow no principle. In other words, they don't have to prove, for example, that it was Osama bin Laden. They can simply attack the house, kill the man, shoot him twice in the head, load his body onto a helicopter, take it to an aircraft carrier, and effectively just throw it into the Indian Ocean.
Right.
And at the same time telling us how wonderful it is that they have respected all Islamic rights in doing so. And I think that's really the starting point. And for example, I went to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI website, just 2 hours ago to check. The FBI is the United States Criminal Investigation Agency with central responsibility for example, hunting Osama bin Laden. And they still haven't, 10 years later, they do not want him for September 11th attacks. That doesn't mean that he didn't do them. It means that they do not see any necessity to abide by any known principles of criminal investigation in this matter. If they declare something to be so, it becomes so.
Well, let me come in here, Jim Brand. Could there be also a deduction about the way this was conducted? I mean, basically, this was just police action. It was an investigation, a raid, and then from what was described, him being shot in the head, a summary execution. And it wasn't the warfare, the 10 years that they have been spending occupying this U.S.-led war into Afghanistan. Put that aside, it was a basic police action, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what that means. I mean, the basic
that means
police
that from
action
September, supposedly when they had the information, 5 months later, it was a police action that took place. So prior to that, with the almost 10 years of this war, I'm separating that from the two, from the latter.
Yeah, I mean, they could have...
in other words, does it take 10 years to occupy a country, lead a war, spend billions, and then have this happen in the way and manner that it did?
Yes, I mean, I think it's worth pointing out as well that they closed down the bin Laden unit. They had a special bin Laden unit that was supposedly set up at the end of 1995, which ran for almost exactly 10 years and was closed down at the end of 2005. And we are now 5.5 years after that unit was closed down. So it certainly shows how little that they were interested in capturing him. At the same time, they doubled their intelligence spending, annual intelligence spending, to $75 billion a year. But they said they couldn't afford to run a special unit to hunt bin Laden. And I think that's a fact worth noting. In
Let me bring in Webster Tarpley. Webster Tarpley, what about the timing of this announcement that it has come at this point? Some of the things that Jim Brand talked about is valid to bring up. How can we really be sure that he was killed then and not before? I mean, there are no remains or even pictures of his death. We could mention the interview that Benazir Bhutto had, which we ran in our report, that stated that bin Laden was actually killed by Ahmed Omar Saeed Sheikh, one of those convicted of kidnapping and killing U.S. journalist Daniel Pearl.
Well, let me say, first of all, I am the author of an exhaustive study on precisely this issue, 9/11 synthetic terror made in USA, so I can only give you a brief sample of that. As you point out, there are no pictures. When the U.S. claimed to have captured Saddam Hussein, they had pictures. They had pictures of him dead. He was shot in the face, a mafia technique, we're told. Buried at sea, DNA very, very quick. No proof, no substantiation. This is the story of bin Laden for the past 10 years. Everything attributed to him is essentially an unsubstantiated assertion by the U.S. government. His role in 9/11, never proven. Al-Qaeda in 9/11, never proven. Asserted and repeated a million times, but never proven. I think the most realistic hypothesis is the biological individual known as bin Laden has been dead for a long time. And what we've been seeing over the past 10 years, pretty much, is a series of doubles, a series of people maneuvered by the U.S. intelligence. We've seen a fat bin Laden, a thin bin Laden. We've seen bin Laden the stout, bin Laden the gaunt. We've seen bin Laden angry, bin Laden scholarly, bin Laden of all types. And now he has been liquidated. Now, if he's been liquidated after the investment of hundreds of billions of dollars to make this person an ego ideal and hero figure for the Arab and to some extent the Islamic world, why is that being done? I think it's extremely ominous. It indicates a flight forward by U.S. imperialism. I think that the very ominous part of this is war between the United States and Pakistan. Already last week, we had the Washington Post and other papers conveniently helped along by WikiLeaks, that CIA limited hangout operation, telling us that at 9/11, the center of gravity of Al-Qaeda was in Karachi, Pakistan. That was the headline of the Washington Post a week ago today. Now we have bin Laden. The fact that he's caught allegedly, again, the story is that he's found in Abbottabad. It's like a military reservation. It's like saying he was found at West Point, New York, or Annapolis, Maryland, or the near the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. The implication is that bin Laden was being shielded and protected by the Pakistani military and the Pakistani ISI. And given the way things are going, that makes them a target. The reason for this, of course, has nothing to do with any fantastic stories about the war on terror. It's simply the idea that Saudi Arabia and Pakistan have attempted to form an alliance to get off the U.S. plantation, out of the U.S. empire. And precisely at the moment that Prince Bandar had gone to Pakistan to set this up, we find that the attacks on Pakistan have intensified.
Right. Let me just bring in our Afghan guest. You can continue with that. I'm sorry, Webster Tarver, you continue with that. Let me just bring in our Afghan guest, give him some time here to get his reaction. Of course, Saeed Ahmad Khamouche, the U.S.'s so-called war on terror was in a large part due to Osama bin Laden, as I'm sure you're well aware, which led to the 2001 U.S.-led war in your country. Don't you think that this should clear the way for withdrawal?
Well, if we look back to the history of the Arabs' involvement in Afghanistan, it goes back to the jihad days, and after the collapse of the communist regime, some of the Arabs remained in Afghanistan, and after the coming to the scene of Al-Qaeda and so on, Pakistanis, they tightened the security situation on them, and some of them left to their countries, and some of them came to inside Afghanistan and become the Afghan Arabs headed by Al-Qaeda, headed by the Al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden. In many internal conflicts of Afghanistan, he took a side and fought against another one, and his role in the assassination of the legendary leader of the Afghanistan, the late Mr. Ahmad Shah Massoud, was ordered by him. And so the Afghan people in general have a bad memory of bin Laden and considers him as the source of miseries to the Afghan people. And I think his being killed cannot heal the wounds of the Afghan people, but at least it will give, to some extent, to the pain of those people a relief.
Well, Jim Brand, when we look at the response there by Saeed Ahmad Khamouche, why don't we look at the other side of the coin of what this has cost the United States, and of course the reasons that they have given from the beginning when they went into Afghanistan, and of course this so-called war on terror and how they have exercised that, not only in Afghanistan, of course Pakistan making it into the umbrella AFPAC region along with all the other activities, billions spent, and of course the lives that have been killed, innocent civilian lives. How do you relate that to the way this announcement was made? At this point, they have said they're going to continue with what they're doing.
Well, I think clearly there is the one possibility, very clear possibility, is that by declaring that they have now achieved after 10 years, one of their stated goals of 10 years ago, which was the capturing or so-called bringing to justice of Osama bin Laden. They stated that that was one of the central goals of the Afghan war of 2001. They do set up the possibility to in some way declare victory. And I think this has to be seen in the context of what for them is a terrible situation in Afghanistan. I think it's quite possible, for example, that this announcement this morning relates, for example, directly back to the escape of the prisoners in Kandahar. That's quite possible, because in a sense it just brings good news, and because they are clearly not achieving the goals in Afghanistan by any measure, it's possible that they can then say, well, we have achieved this. The drone war, which has killed something like 2,000 people in Pakistan in the last few years, which has all the hallmarks of, I must say, of the grossest illegality, that they can say, well, it's all been worth it. And that's possible. So they could be setting up this, at least a drawdown, if not a withdrawal. Not at all because they actually think that they won, but simply because this is the second best. This is probably as good as it gets to be able to declare that they've achieved this.
I'm going to take the word setting up there, Jim Brand, and ask Webster Tarpley, please, if you can. We have to look at the consequences of this announcement, and of course why it was announced now, and the significance of it. And one of it is that it may increase the chance of a revenge attack. So, do you think that is it a stretch to say that the U.S. is setting up the grounds for any type of military incursion or adventurism? I mean, we can look at the situation in Yemen with the presence of AQAP in the south, but tell us what you think, whether this is a scenario of something to come by U.S.
I'm afraid right now the door to a false flag terror operation staged by the US, British, or NATO intelligence community, this door is now wide open. It will simply be attributed to Al-Qaeda, so-called. It will be a revenge attack, but at the same time it will be explained as promoted by Pakistan or some other country that the US wishes to target. And people should realize this is the dynamic of false flags. What we're seeing now is why, when the Spanish Empire collapsed, you had virtually a world war. The French Empire, the British Empire, all of these collapses of empires led to world wars. And we're now in the collapse phase of the US empire, as was discussed in Aspen, Colorado last summer. We are now in very acute danger of general war. Since we have Saudi Arabia and Pakistan joining together to get out of the US empire, with Russia and China backing them up. An attack on Pakistan could easily lead to a collision between the United States and China, and perhaps also a collision between the United States and Russia, with the Russians also being very displeased by what the US is doing in Libya. So this is all going on. The other thing I would certainly stress is that this now leaves the Al-Qaeda, so-called, this gaggle of patsies and psychotics and fanatics. The leader, I guess, of that right now is Anwar al-Awlaki, known in the trade as al-Awlaki, the CIA lackey. In other words, a fairly obvious double agent. The irony right now is that the U.S. is allied with al-Qaeda, most obviously in Libya, in the city of Darna, but also in Yemen, whereas in the Pakistan-Afghanistan area, al-Qaeda is still viewed as a target to be bombed and strafed.
Right. Saeed Ahmad Khamouch, when I heard your response, I'm curious about that meeting that Karzai spoke about today and what your reaction is. And one of the things that the tribal elders disagree on, in which, if you're not aware, your country is being used for, which has been a success, and that is the building of military bases, which basically adds up to this empire, as our guests have mentioned. How does that make you feel that your country, in that respect, has been a success? These building of U.S. military bases, which can be used for a variety of reasons, obviously, in some sense, violating the integrity of Afghanistan.
Well, the question of the military bases in Afghanistan can be used as a basis for the U.S. influence in the region, but their justification of their presence in Afghanistan would be that the roots of Al-Qaeda are still alive and they are working, and there is a threat to the security of the United States and its allies. Therefore, they will be there for a long term. The history of Afghanistan has shown, after any withdrawal of any invaders, the Afghan themselves, being supported by the rival neighbors, has been used as it happened after the Soviet withdrawal or the Soviet defeat in Afghanistan that took a decade and eventually lead to the emergence of the Taliban and then the Al-Qaeda and the rest of the 2001 till 2011.
Okay, I need a short answer from you, Jim Brand, to end the program. Jim Brand, I mean, how can we look at the lies that have been fed through the media when we look at what happened with the invasion of Iraq? Of course, the WMD is there. The forged documents, the Iraqi government tried to buy yellow cake is another instance. I mean, in this case, what is it to ensure the fact that this indeed has actually occurred, and what benefits would this have for the announcement at this point in time for the United States, if you may?
I think first of all we should look at, as you quite rightly say, look at the whole war on terror. Clearly things are announced, things are used for quite ulterior purposes, and that's very clearly the number one lesson of the war on terror, that other things are being done under the guise of responding to some attack. And I think we should see this very much in that context, that this has been announced today in a very deliberate way for ulterior motives, and people should simply be very aware of that. That's the entire history of the war on terror.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we ran out of time. Jim Brand, their spokesman at Stop the War Coalition from London. Also, Saeed Ahmad Khamouche. Thank you, political analyst from Kabul, and Webster G. Tarpley, author of Journalist and Lecturer, and of course the book that he pointed, 9/11. I forgot the rest of the title there. I apologize, Webster Tarpley. And thank you, the viewer, for watching. Do send us your questions, newsroom@presstv.ir. We'd love to hear from you with any critiques or anything you have to say. From me, and the entire team, it's goodbye.